Imagine building a business so successful that duchesses, countesses, shady priests, and the literal mistress of King Louis XIV are all lining up outside your door. Need somebody to fall madly in love with you? I got you. Need to know if your husband is cheating? I got you. Need your inheritance to arrive a little sooner than nature intended? Well, that's our premium package, but if you can afford it, meet Catherine Monvoisin, better known as 𝐂𝐻𝐿, a Paris fortune teller whose little home business evolved into one of the largest poisoning networks in French history. Catherine was born around 1640. We don't know much about her early life, but we do know that she married Antoine Monvoisin, a silk merchant whose business swiftly swan-dived off a cliff. Suddenly, Catherine had bills, kids, and a broke husband. With roughly 3 career options for 14th century women, she got creative and started practicing midwifery and fortune-telling. Luckily for her, in 1600s Paris, fortune-telling was all the rage. Rich people loved being told that the universe was personally invested in their drama. So Catherine gave them the full experience: palmistry, face reading, and astrological charts. Soon, clients were waiting outside at the crack of dawn. Business would be booming all throughout the day, and in the evening she hosted open dinners with musicians and plenty of celebrating. Come on in, everyone, enjoy the music, and don't forget to leave a little something in the tip jar. This was not some sad little folding table at the back of a flea market. Catherine had built a luxury brand. And Catherine was a master at reading people. Rich clients didn't show up because life was great. They showed up because their husbands were cheating or their rivals were in the way. Catherine quickly became a sort of 1600s life coach with lots of planets and crystals involved. At first, she offered predictions and advice, but predictions don't solve problems. If Catherine told a woman that her lover was drifting away, their next question was typically going to be like, "Okay, girl, how do I fix that?" So clearly, her business model had to evolve. She started selling charms, amulets, powders, and love potions that supposedly helped people find a new partner, or keep the one they already had. Oh, your husband isn't affectionate enough? Here's a potion. Is your boyfriend seeing someone else? No worries, here's a charm. Even Madame de Montespan, King Louis XIV's official chief mistress, came knocking. Louis had the romantic attention span of a golden retriever, and he was suddenly eyeing a gorgeous 17-year-old named Mademoiselle de Fontanges. Terrified of getting replaced, Montespan wanted the most heavy-duty love potions ASAP. And eventually, clients stopped asking how to keep their partners, and they started asking how to eliminate them permanently. Turns out, being a widow is sometimes easier than being a spouse. By the 1670s, Catherine had built an absolute empire. She put together an Ocean's 11-style team of experts: fortune tellers, alchemists, midwives, and shady priests with very flexible ethics. One person knew how to obtain certain substances, another prepared special powders, somebody else performed rituals, and everyone knew what to do and where to be. Catherine found the wealthy customers, of course, arranged the services they needed, and connected everybody for a reasonable fee. Easy peasy. Demand was through the roof. French nobility was trapped in arranged marriages with 0 legal options for divorce. Inheritance was everything, and Versailles was a viper's nest where one sudden illness could open very exciting vacancies. Plus, 17th century doctors were clueless. A person could become slowly or weaken over time and just get a diagnosis of, maybe the air is bad. Have you tried going to the countryside? But even the biggest gurus and hustlers come crashing down. Cough, cough, crypto bros. So in 1676, Marquise de Brinvilliers, a noblewoman accused of using poison against members of her own family, was sentenced to a permanent deletion. The scandal made headlines and panicked the nation. King Louis XIV realized that poisoning was becoming something of a national crisis, so he appointed Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, Paris's first lieutenant general of police, to investigate, and Reynie took his job very seriously. He immediately began collecting reports, questioning suspects, and tracing connections between poison sellers, fortune tellers, alchemists, and their wealthy customers. Then, in 1678, one woman made the investigation a whole lot easier by getting drunk at a party and announcing her crimes to the room like she was some sort of genius looking for props. Her name was Marie Beauce. Marie was another successful fortune teller who also allegedly sold poison, and during a gathering at the home of her friend Marie 𝐓𝐷𝐄𝐫, she reportedly started bragging that she had made so much money selling poison to wealthy people that she was about to retire. Ma'am, you cannot openly announce your poison-based retirement plan in a room full of people, especially when there is a lawyer at the party. That lawyer promptly reported her to the police. Reynie set up a sting operation, and before long, both Marie Beauce and her party-throwing friend Marie 𝐓𝐷𝐄𝐫 were arrested in January of 1679, along with members of their families. And true to her big-mouth behavior, as soon as Marie Beauce was interrogated, she started dropping names. They all did, and as the investigation expanded, one name kept coming up, La Voisin. Because Marie Beauce might have sold dangerous products, but Catherine had the high-end clients. The investigation was closing in. On March 12th of 1679, Catherine attended Mass at Notre Dame des Bonnes Nouvelles in Paris. And when she walked out of church, police were waiting for her. Can you imagine going from "forgive us our trespasses" to "I plead the fifth" while all of your friends and family are streaming out of church? When Catherine's servant heard what had happened, she supposedly predicted that the arrest would destroy people at every level of society, and she was not wrong. This woman had been consulting with Parisian merchants, officers, nobles, countesses, and even members of the royal court. If Catherine started naming clients, France's most exclusive social network was about to become France's most expensive court docket. In April of 1679, Louis XIV created a special tribunal to handle the growing scandal. It became known as the Chambre Ardente, because nothing says this is an unbiased legal system like naming your courtroom the Burning Chamber. Over the next 2 years, the investigation issued hundreds of summonses, arrested nearly 200 people, and sent 36 defendants towards extremely permanent consequences. Fortune tellers were questioned, priests were arrested, and connected nobles fled France in a real hurry. When suspects were interrogated, often under physical duress, they immediately threw other people under the bus to save themselves. The case was spreading like wildfire with names upon names upon names, but there was a serious problem with the investigation. Most of these suspects had obvious reasons to accuse rivals, protect customers, minimize their own involvement, or tell interrogators whatever would temporarily stop these painful inquisitions. So, as the case expanded and the suspect list grew, investigators found themselves with a real quantity over quality problem. Not all of these accusations could possibly be true, and it was going to be almost impossible to sweat them out. It was basically history's worst referral program. And that's not the only problem. Catherine's own interrogations were risky. She had admitted to fortune-telling and connecting clients, but she was playing her cards smart, refusing to give interrogators a neat list of how the network worked. Not to mention, this was a bit of a delicate situation. The authorities were terrified that if they subjected her to the more physical questioning methods, she might start screaming the names of royal court members in front of everyone. And historians can't seem to agree on whether or not Catherine was subjected to the quote-unquote question, but some documents certainly imply that she was, and more than once. But others argue that the inquisitors used a very different tactic, keeping her constantly drunk on wine. Perhaps if they kept her hammered enough, she'd get chatty and spill the tea. But whether drunk or sober, Catherine was a professional. She refused to hand them the detailed confession they were looking for. Why? Because the higher her client list went, the more terrifying things got. And nobody was higher than Madame de Montespan, the king's favorite mistress. Unfortunately for Catherine, other suspects were more than willing to spill the deets that she wasn't giving, claiming that Madame de Montespan purchased love powders and arranged magical rituals intended to secure the king's affection. And the allegations got darker. Catherine's own daughter, Marguerite, along with a fortune teller named Adam Rossage and a priest named 𝐂𝐻𝐿, described secret religious ceremonies allegedly performed for Montespan. These became the famous stories of the so-called Black Masses at Versailles, and they were not pretty. Witnesses claimed that disgraced priests were performing bizarre, reversed rituals over Montespan while she was lying on the altar in her full-on birthday suit. Now, did these horror movie rituals actually happen, or were prisoners telling interrogators what they wanted to hear under extremely intense questioning procedures? Perhaps we'll never know, but the rumors alone sent shockwaves through Versailles. I mean, this was scandalous. But Catherine's daughter wasn't done spilling tea, and she later testified that when the king took on his new teenage mistress, Montespan wanted them both to be yeeted into an early afterlife. So she hired Catherine to prepare a poisoned petition, and Catherine would hand it directly to King Louis XIV herself. As the story goes, Catherine went to court to deliver it, but the line of petitioners was way too long, and she wasn't about to stand around holding poisoned paper all day, so she just went home and burned it. A week later, she got arrested. Can you imagine being saved from an assassination purely because the line at the DMV was too long? In February of 1680, Catherine stood trial, was convicted of witchcraft and treason, and sentenced to the stake. Through all of her questioning, she never admitted to having actually participated in any poisonings, although she did state that, quote, a great number of persons of every sort of rank and condition addressed themselves to her to seek the death of, or to find the means to kill many people. Which is basically like saying, sure, all sorts of people came to me to try and control-alt-delete someone, but I'm done giving names. Guess you'll just have to wonder who else came knocking. Absolutely diabolical. On February 22nd, 1680, Catherine was taken to her sentencing ceremony, and in true La Voisin style, she did not go quietly into that good night. She had spent much of her final few days drinking a crap ton of wine, singing drinking songs, being vulgar, and even mocking the religious hymns her guards encouraged her to sing, not to mention repeatedly refusing to see a confessor. Not confessing your sins before you head to the afterlife is like a guaranteed ticket downstairs, so that's wild. On the morning of her last day, officials gave her only broth, apparently because they were done funding her prison happy hour and wanted her as weak as possible. During the procession, aka the very public parade past Notre Dame, she still refused to confess and repeatedly shoved away both the priest and his crucifix. No last rites for this lady, thanks. And finally, at the Place des Grèves, she fought against leaving the prison card. Several officials had to pull her out by force. When they chained her to the stake and covered her with straw, she swore at them and pushed the straw away 5 or 6 times. So no, Catherine did not go calmly. She created an entire spectacle right up until she physically couldn't anymore. It was as legendary as you would expect. And then finally, it was over. But if King Louis thought getting rid of La Voisin would close the case, he was dead wrong. Instead, it made everything worse. Catherine's daughter, Marguerite, kept talking. So did 𝐂𝐻𝐃, and other prisoners. And unfortunately for the king, Madame de Montespan's name just kept coming up with more accusations. Once the evidence pointed directly at the mother of his children, Louis XIV's gotta catch 'em all attitude vanished real quick, and he developed a sudden, deep appreciation for royal privacy. The king quietly sealed the evidence, sentenced key witnesses to prison forever without trial, and shut the burning chamber down. The scandal had officially reached the limit of royal justice, his family. By the time the affair of the poisons wound down, 36 people were given sentences to the afterlife. Dozens more had been imprisoned or exiled, and hundreds had been questioned or accused. In 1682, Louis XIV issued a royal edict cracking down on fortune tellers and forcing sellers of toxic substances to keep strict records. So congratulations to La Voisin for accidentally inventing pharmaceutical regulation. Not the legacy she was going for, but we take our public health victories where we can get on them, alright? We may never know how many people Catherine actually helped send into the afterlife, but looking back, Catherine Monvoisin was so much more than a one-dimensional villain. She was a businesswoman who saw society being choked by arranged marriages and greed and decided to monetize it. So tell me, What's the difference between Catherine's business model and some of today's more modern CEOs? Seems to me that a cutthroat attitude isn't all they might have in common. Drop your thoughts below. And if Catherine's poison network sounded elaborate, check out our episode on the woman who launched a 40-year royal feud after going from palace servant to ruthless queen. Her name was Fredegund, and I'll link that one in the show notes. And until next time, keep your receipts, cause a little chaos, and remember, networking is the key to good business.